want to make sure it's not about me, but about the city of Melbourne, that we all love.
I want to see a town hall where our community is reflected.
I think the answer is to have an independent Lord Mayor. Genuinely.
You know, I'm not a one-trick pony, and even being a midwife is not being a one-trick pony.
Tackling the cost of living crisis, keeping rates low.
Melbourne is going to double its population in a little under 2 decades.
Melbourne is the best and fairest city.
Making sure that Melbourne moves, Melbourne breathes, Melbourne thrives and keeps moving.
Welcome to this special Six News presentation as we continue our coverage of the Victorian local government elections. This is a Lord Mayoral town hall with 8 of the 11 candidates running for Lord Mayor of Melbourne, debating a wide range of issues with a specific focus on housing. This event was done in conjunction with YIMBY Melbourne and Housing All Australians, and with the special support of Fed Square and Ausstage events. Robert Pradlin is the Executive Director at Housing All Australians. He introduced the event. There was also a pre-poll and post-poll done among the audience, and we'll get to those results a little later.
Let me provide you all with a bit of a backdrop to the discussion tonight. For those of you that don't know Housing All Australians, we are a private sector initiative looking at housing as connection to homelessness through an economic lens. Coming with an economic lens, one of the first things we did is to commission an economic study into the long-term cost to Australia if we didn't provide sufficient social and affordable housing. The results were sobering. It's a reality check of the economic consequences we are leaving future generations. And to set the scene, let me share 2 key outcomes. The analysis predicts that by 2032, a future government will be paying, in today's dollars, an additional $25 billion per annum and growing. This is a direct result for the unintended consequences of that manifest themselves in physical and mental health, family violence, policing, justice, and long-term welfare dependency. And with all the competing demands on the federal governments, as we know, the outcome would likely be that these costs would not be fully funded to the extent needed, and therefore the level of care that we provide to vulnerable people will be reduced significantly. The result? Our Australian values will be watered down. We are heading for a lose-lose scenario. Coming back to Victoria, and particularly Greater Melbourne, one of the other important numbers to come out of the study was a cost-benefit ratio. A cost-benefit ratio is used by government to evaluate projects that are in the public interest. For Greater Melbourne, the cost-benefit ratio associated with the development of social and affordable housing is 3.4 to 1. That means for every $1 invested, we actually save $3.4 of future taxpayer costs. And these costs are over and above the erosion of our societal values that will occur. This cost-benefit ratio is better than any infrastructure project that we have done. Now, I'm not saying we should invest in other infrastructure projects. We must. But what I'm highlighting is the strong business case that sits behind investing in social and affordable housing in order to mitigate these long-term societal costs. The business case is a no-brainer. I was coming tonight to prepare the framework so we can discuss the future that you, if you're elected Lord Mayor, can help shape. The City of Melbourne can be a national leader in demonstrating how true collaboration can make things happen. Australia's crisis is too big for government to solve alone. It is a problem for the entire society, and that includes business. So, some of you may wonder why Leo is going to ask you all the questions. Well, given the framework that I've just shared with you, it is Leo's generation that will be paying these costs, let alone living in a different society than we have today. So it's with that I'd like to introduce Leo. Now, Leo is a 16-year-old journalist and the founder of Six News 6 News 24/7 streaming news channel, which he started when he was 11 years old. Try and think back what you were doing at 11. He's a keen interest in local government elections, and as a young person is concerned about entering the housing market once he leaves school, let alone fund the future additional costs that I've just mentioned. Please welcome Leo to introduce the candidates and to give the opening statements. Thank you.
Really nice to be here. We're going to obviously begin with those opening statements from all candidates here. Based on what Robert has said in terms of the economic and social consequences that my generation, Gen Z, will have to face, please, candidates, lay out in no more than 2 minutes what actions the City of Melbourne, with you as Lord Mayor, would be taking in actually making sure things happen and starting what will be a long journey in delivering more affordable homes where people want to live and where key workers need to be. We'll work our way through each candidate down the line, and we'll start off with Councillor Hakim of Team Hakim.
Thank you. Thanks, Leo, and good evening, everyone. How wonderful is it to be here on Wurundjeri Woiwurrung land. I also want to acknowledge country. Now, housing is at the heart of Melbourne's future, and it's essential that we address this with innovative and practical solutions. As Lord Mayor, I'm committed to ensuring that Melbourne is not only livable, but also affordable for all. Our city must evolve with a clear vision of inclusivity and resilience. We need to provide more affordable housing options while also preserving the identity that makes Melbourne unique. And that means working with the City of Melbourne's control to remove bottlenecks in the development process, streamlining quality planning approvals, and ensuring excellent design, especially for family-friendly apartments. Now, I stand by the belief that a home is a right, not a luxury. And in fact, we heard from Rob earlier that affordable housing is an economic importance. My postcode 3000 commitment focuses on reviewing our urban environment to identify the most effective ways to house more people within our city affordably. By focusing on creative solutions, such as building well-designed housing on council-owned land and advocating for social and public housing from state and federal governments, we can make meaningful change. So let's prioritise affordable housing that works for everyone, from families to individuals. Thank you, everybody.
Continuing, we'll go to Roxane Ingleton from the Greens.
Thank you, and I would also like to acknowledge we meet on the land of the Wurundjeri people. I announced my candidacy for Lord Mayor with a pledge to make this campaign about housing supply and affordability. The first policy the Greens launched was titled Abundant Affordable Homes, because we are in a housing and cost of living crisis. And so at every opportunity I have, I talk about what council can do to work with other levels of government to make Melbourne a truly welcoming place for everyone, including those priced out of living here. So let's talk about housing and let's talk about supply, because we need more of it. The Greens think we can meet and beat the state government's draft housing capacity targets. We think the remnants of the neighbourhood residential zone inside City of Melbourne have had their day, and council should lead by example, scrapping the NRZ so other metropolitan councils are encouraged to upzone as well. We think our urban renewal areas like Arden, Eagate and Dynon, yet to be sold to private developers, we want the yield to be generous so that government can demand public benefits like affordable housing, confident that the building finance will stack up. We say that the affordable housing rate in those areas should be 30%, well below London's 50%, but in line with what developers can handle on newly sold sites. We're going to have to try a lot of things, and council will need to cooperate on multi-level government reform. If we don't, Melbourne simply won't be a place where you can afford to live where you work. We risk entrenching an economy where essential workers commute for hours each day to and from the CBD, while preserving the inner ring of suburbs for the very rich. It's a recipe for taking the life and the creative soul out of inner Melbourne. And frankly, I'm not interested in being Lord Mayor of that city. I'm a midwife, I'm not a CEO. I rent my home in North Melbourne and I'd quite like to stay there. But more importantly, I want that opportunity to be extended to the generations of Melburnians who follow us. And that's why I'm running for Lord Mayor.
We'll keep moving on. Thank you very much. We'll go to From Voices for Melbourne, Greg Bisanella.
Thanks, Leo. Any NIMBYs in here tonight? Thanks also to you for putting on this event this evening. I can see from the people that are here that this is a very important issue to be discussed. So good evening to all of you. I did say a good evening to all of you. No response. Thank you. When I was a school teacher many years ago, I used to walk into the classroom, look to the class and I'd say, "Good afternoon, class," and they'd come back and say, "Good afternoon, Mr. Bisanella." But I guess times have changed, so just please call me Greg. I am the mayoral candidate for the Voices for Melbourne team. We are what we'd call a gentle group, GNTL, genuinely independent, non-politically party aligned, a team of resident and small business owners who live, work, study and play in the neighbourhoods in the City of Melbourne. And if we put a bit of a framework around this discussion tonight, the City of Melbourne is currently 170,000 people who live in the CBD and the neighbourhoods, and that number is expected to double over the next 20 years. That is an increase of 8,000 a year for the next 20 years. Now, our challenge is how do we accommodate that growth? Anyone here live in Carlton, Parkville, North Melbourne, West Melbourne, Docklands, South Bank, East Melbourne, South Yarra and the CBD? Because all these areas make up the City of Melbourne. And at the same time, the broader Melbourne population is expected to double to 8 million people. And these people need somewhere to live. No, actually, they need a home, a sustainable and vibrant community, not a poorly built box of 4 walls and a bed. It is a community and all the elements that make up a well-functioning community, like shops and healthcare and art centres and sporting facilities and some green open spaces. So I'm looking forward tonight to sharing some of our ideas with you and also hearing some of your suggestions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll keep moving down from Team Wood, Aaron Wood.
Thanks very much to everyone for being here tonight. Team Wood is also a proudly independent team made up of independent leadership. And I've been a small business owner and a resident of Kensington for nearly 20 years. I think it's really important that we have the private sector working hand in glove with all levels of government to focus on an issue which is not just about housing, but is actually really impacting business as well. When we talk about key worker housing, if we can't have those key workers living where they work, that actually impacts on business. So it's not just a housing issue as well. The thing is too that we've done this before. When I was on council for 8 years as the Deputy Mayor and Acting Mayor, we established the Munro development where over 50 affordable housing apartments was delivered and 6 additional apartments handed to the TAC for those with special needs. So it can be done, particularly on council property. But we need to fast track more private housing, including more affordable and key worker housing. And the way that you do that is to support the establishment of an affordable housing register. We think 30 years to be on that register is about the right timeline. We support a density uplift for affordable housing, and much is made of density, but medium density can achieve a lot in a city like Melbourne. But this needs to stack up from the private sector perspective, and what we're seeing at the moment is even with that uplift, we're not seeing projects get out of the ground when we need them most. So the City of Melbourne needs to work with the state government and the federal government to look at how they can forego revenue for this critical issue, and that's rates, GST and land tax. Team Wood also supports increasing the threshold for removing stamp duty for newly built apartments from $600,000 to $800,000, so we can get this stock into the market at a time when we need it most as well. The other area is to reduce the bureaucratic time delays through planning reforms, because we know that holding costs are real costs for developers in getting these projects out of the ground. And finally, an audit of all Melbourne properties and a target of affordable housing to lead by example on any City of Melbourne developments. We think housing is absolutely a right. It's also a huge impact to business in our city, and we need to get this right. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. We'll keep moving down, and from Team Nick Rees, Lord Mayor Nick Rees.
Well, hello everybody. My name's Nick Rees, Lord Mayor of Melbourne, and thank you all for turning out to this important debate this evening. Can I thank Rob and Leo for facilitating, and can I also begin by acknowledging that we are meeting on the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people. Well, thank you all for turning up. I think that housing affordability is the most pressing debate in Australia right now. How a nation like ours, with all the resources, the abundance of land, and as being as prosperous as we are, can have a housing affordability crisis is beyond comprehension. Housing is a basic human right, and as a nation, we should be able to ensure that every Australian has access to it. This is an area that I'm particularly passionate about. I have chaired the planning portfolio at the City of Melbourne. You want to know how to lose friends and annoy people? Try looking after planning in the inner city of Melbourne. This is a difficult area. If there were easy solutions, we would have already found them. But tonight, I hope we can press ahead with some ideas that can find widespread support. Secondly, I should say I have had the experience of a housing crisis in my own family. So I know how easy it is for someone to go from a home to homeless. And then I've also been involved in the big issue for more than 2 decades in Melbourne, a fabulous service helping people, some of the most vulnerable in our community, find a pathway back. But tonight we need to move beyond just platitudes. We need to talk about some of the concrete actions that we can take. I truly believe that Melbourne can be bigger and better, but we need to get the policy settings right. You need to have a town hall that knows what it's doing, and we need leadership. So let me just put 4 ideas out there, 4 points that I think could help deliver the 134,000 new homes that the City of Melbourne is signed up to under the state government target by 2051. The first is council needs to identify land for new housing. Now, this can begin with council's own land, where it identifies surplus land, offer that up for long-term affordable housing. We are seeing that happen around the city at the moment. The Munro site has been mentioned. Also, there's a site on Victoria Parade in North Melbourne, which is also out to market at the moment for just that end. The second is looking at those vast tracts of developable land close to the city, which can house quality, affordable homes for a new generation of Melburnians. So Arden, Macaulay, Fisherman's Bend, West Melbourne, the city, these are all areas which are ripe for new development and can set this city up for the future. Secondly, we need to look at how we can leverage the planning system to deliver more and improved affordable housing outcomes. At the City of Melbourne, we are proudly a YIMBY council, and I know councillors who are here tonight would agree with me on that. There are already in the pipeline 100 projects with 16,000 dwellings which have been approved by council that are ready to go. We genuinely do lean in approving new housing in our municipality. We also need to look at how we can convert office towers, those empty office towers, into new residential development. One of the policies I'm putting forward in this election is looking at the 80 towers around the city which are identified as prime buildings for new residential development. We've done this in the past, and we believe we can deliver 4,000 new homes over the next term during using that policy. Thirdly, we need to advocate for systemic change. You know, we've got a federal tax system which has turned houses, a basic human right, into an investment class and priced too many ordinary people out of the market. Secondly, we need changes at a state tax system as well. there used to be tax breaks like off-the-plan stamp duty exemption, which provide an incentive for people to buy into new homes, increasing supply and making the pathway to new homes easier for people. That's a change that we should strongly advocate for. Finally, I think any council in this city should strongly support the most vulnerable, the rough sleepers, recognising that there's a continuum in housing that runs from rough sleeping all the way through to home ownership. One of the things this council has done in this term is the Make Room project, delivering 50 studio apartments for rough sleepers in our city. Lord Mayor Sally Capp, Councillor Olivia Bull and others have really got behind that. It's been a transformational project which will help the most vulnerable in our community. And I do think that it's just something that we should be looking at for the next term. So there's 4 big ideas, bold ideas that can actually be delivered. I'm hoping we can unpack them tonight in the debate. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll keep moving on now from Labor for Melbourne, Philip Reid.
Thanks, Leo. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen. Can I start by also acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we're meeting here tonight and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. Labor for Melbourne is campaigning in these elections under the theme of keeping local government local. And the critical decision that led us to campaigning and putting forward that theme was the very issue that's on the table here tonight, housing. The facts are, and we've heard it referenced in various statistics tonight, so I'll give you another one. In the next 20 years, the City of Melbourne is set to become the second fastest growing municipality in Victoria, with 1 in 20 new homes being built right here in the City of Melbourne. Now, while the growth in housing and the growth in employment that comes with it is to be welcomed, it also means we need a council that's doing more than being a passenger in the debate around housing. It needs to be driving the discussion to make sure that we're providing housing options that meet a diverse population base. Options for renters and buyers, options for downsizers and upsizers. Options for individuals of all shapes and individuals and families of all shapes and sizes. As a former TAC road safety executive, I was delighted to hear the reference earlier to providing housing options for people with mobility impairment. And of course, right at the heart of it, and again, it's also been referenced earlier, the key workers, those workers who make our city tick, often in unseen jobs, but we sure notice when those jobs aren't being done. But let's put the level of growth that we're going to experience in perspective. In the next 4 years, Melbourne's going to increase in size by a population base of about the size of a Victorian regional town, somewhere between a town the size of Warrnambool and Horsham. Labor for Melbourne recognise that that level of growth requires a focus not just on the houses, but the services and facilities that we usually associate with municipalities on Melbourne's urban fringe. Childcare, parks and playgrounds, maternal and child health at one end of the spectrum, aged services and housing opportunities at the other end of the spectrum, and plenty in between. In short, we need to make sure we're building communities, not just homes. By our calculations, and what we'll commit to doing, is by the time the elections roll around in 2028, we'll have 5 new kinders, 2 more libraries and 2 more large-scale sport and recreational facilities underway to meet that population need. It's absolutely consistent with the population growth we'll see. More importantly, it's council's job. We should be an exemplar in how local government rises to the challenge of housing, and with the Labor for Melbourne team and my leadership of it, I'm confident we can be. I look forward to answering your questions in the later part of the debate about precisely how we'll do that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We're going to continue here. The Deputy Candidate from Liberals for Melbourne, Luke Martin.
Well, thank you for having me. I am here on behalf of our fantastic Lord Mayor candidate, Mariam, who cannot be with us here today. But the Liberal Party is here today, ladies and gentlemen, because we want to campaign in Melbourne for the first time ever, because we are the party of business. We are the parties of families, no matter their composition, and we are the parties that support and encourage strong and vibrant communities. The word crisis gets thrown around a lot, but I can certainly relate to being a little bit older than my friend here, trying to run around and find a rental apartment when I was struggling at university. That was hard. Things have got incredibly tougher for people looking to rent and also for people looking to buy. The Liberal Party is the party that will always support home ownership. Home ownership, in addition to having a job, is one of the great things that economic growth, economic development can deliver. Not only does that make a person feel the ability to go out and earn and spend and raise their family, but it also gives them purpose. As a very wise Australian once said in relation to homes, it's not just a house, it's indeed a home. And the Liberal Party will certainly look to do more and certainly look to do all it can to get as many Australians as possible into their own homes. It's not easy. As someone said before, if it was easy, it all would have been done before. And when we do have a situation where the city is growing because people want to live here, because it is a fantastic place to live, as all the Liberal candidates know, all four of us are locals. We live in different parts of the city, but we love it. We do want to make sure that when we do get more housing supply into the city, that we do respect our heritage and we do respect the built environment that is already here. There has to be a balanced approach, and under a Liberal Party policy, we will always have a balanced approach to making sure you get housing supply, but not at the expense of our beautiful heritage and not at the expense of the quality of life that people that choose to live, work and invest in this great city. Investment in housing is necessary. There is a supply problem, and I was very pleased to hear our opening remarks that this is an economic problem. There is issues around supply, and we need to make sure that there is more affordable supply through all areas of housing in Melbourne. Whilst we need to encourage as much sensible investment as possible, the Liberal Party will never sell Melbourne's heritage to pay for our agenda, and will never give foreign investors a leg up over Melburnians trying to make their way and get their own home in the middle of a housing crisis. Thank you for listening. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. One more candidate to go, and I'll get out of his seat as well. From Team Kuta, Anthony Koutafidis.
Thanks everyone, and well done to all the candidates who have spoken before, and to Leo, terrific mate, the future of Australia, at 16 to do what you did. It's fantastic mate, keep up the good work, it's exactly what we need, and we understand the importance of the housing crisis. I have kids myself, and I just think how lucky I was when I grew up when I did, and compared to how difficult it will be for them if we don't do something about it. So for us at Team Kuta, we have spoken to a lot of property experts just to see and get their advice of what we need in Melbourne. And as Nick said previously, there's around about 80 vacant or semi-vacant office buildings that we believe can be converted into affordable housing, and that's really important. So we think even if we only do half of them or a quarter of them, we can get around 10,000 dwellings to help that. We think it's a wonderful number to ease the pain for a lot of people, and these type of accommodations can be best suitable for lower paid workers, such as cleaners, hospitality staff, healthcare workers, and just think if they're able to live in the city, then they don't have to worry about transport, car parking issues and things like that. That has been quite an issue for a lot of the people previous. We also think in terms of builders, it must be feasible for them to be able to build, so there has to be incentives for them to be able to build, and so, you know, things like rate holds for multiple years and other assistance where they can go, and we need Victorian government also to help, but whatever we can do as the City of Melbourne to give them an incentive to be able to build. And I also think of the property owners that currently, if their properties are vacant, what the price of those properties are compared to what they would be if they were there with affordable housing in there and people were actually living in the offices, so it helps both extremes. And so also a further incentive for carbon footprint. So we love the fact that the incentives of using solar power, rooftop gardens, vertical gardens and things like this, we can give more of an incentive for these builders to be able to build. So thank you very much for your time, and looking forward to the questions.
Thank you very much to all candidates there. We'll begin with a question for all candidates. As Lord Mayor, let's assume the council is asked to consider a 6-storey social housing build in Carlton. How would you, as Lord Mayor, respond to a constituent who lives nearby and opposes this development? We'll just work our way down the line and we'll start with you, Mr. Koutafidis.
Sorry, I thought that was to Nick. Ask that question again, sorry?
For all candidates, as Lord Mayor, let's assume the council is asked to consider a 6-storey social housing build in Carlton. If you're elected Lord Mayor, how would you respond to a constituent who lives nearby and opposes that development?
Well, obviously you've got to consider the people that are living around there, and you know, that's something we've really got to be careful of. I mean, suburbs like that we've really got to preserve, in my opinion. It's a heritage area, and it wouldn't be a simple solution like it would be for the CBD. And so, yeah, I'd really want to know. I mean, myself, if you know, living there, you wouldn't want to see all these buildings built if it wasn't built in an appropriate way, and making sure that it really does look like the rest of the suburb. I think that's important too. I mean, it's got to look that way, and so when people drive through there, they look at something that looks the way it should look.
Yeah.
I'd look forward to having that conversation, because obviously the person asking that question loves their community, loves the wonderful suburb of Carlton, as I did when I lived there when I was at university. So I'd really want to talk to them, understand what their issues and concerns were, and make sure that feedback got to the right people in council to make sure we got a good result for residents, but also understand the objectives of the housing development to start with. So a good conversation is what would be happening.
Yeah, look, I think first and foremost, we need to understand what the concerns are, and again, I might be jumping to conclusions here, but often we see these debates come around neighbourhood character, and I think we've got to be really focused on, as a council, not to simply say that we have to retain neighbourhood character. We actually need to create neighbourhood character, and that's through some of the things I was talking about earlier, looking at what sorts of services do people actually rely on to make a community. So let's make sure if we're putting up 6-storey affordable dwellings, it's not just seen in terms of an influx of new residents or an influx of a certain type of resident, but that we're looking at what are the opportunities this can lead to create a better community. Does this development bring with it opportunities for more services that will make the community more livable and start creating character and a new sense of neighbourhood and community for the people who already live there, plus the ones who are going to come there?
So I've lived in a street with social housing for more than 20 years. So my starting point is that I think social housing can be an important part of any neighbourhood and actually can enhance the character of the neighbourhood if it's done well. And Carlton, I think, is a suburb which has actually shown that that is possible, as many other inner city suburbs. In terms of our planning system, if it is a social housing project which has been run by the Victorian government, then it actually bypasses the City of Melbourne, which is a source of frustration actually to the City of Melbourne, because we, I think, can play a constructive role in actually helping a community understand a project. You know, we try to get to yes and find a way in which you bring the community along with you on these things. In terms of the appropriateness of a 6-storey tower in Carlton, well, given the different zonings across Carlton, it's going to depend on exactly where it is. If it's in sort of the city north component of Carlton, between Victoria Parade, Queensbury Street, then there'll be no problems there. If it's up the Swanston Street corridor there'll be no problems there. But if it's in some of the sort of heritage neighbourhood residential zones, then there might be some challenges to trying to build 6 stories there. But overall, my approach to this would be to try and work with the developer, work with the community, and get to a good outcome for everyone.
So I've got Harlanur on my ticket, who grew up in the housing towers of Carlton. I've lived in Kensington for many years, which has lots of social housing dotted throughout it, and I think it brings a vibrancy to the community. I think what is incumbent on council is to work to solutions in these cases, and what I've found is often that stigma that comes with social housing is because people don't understand it. They don't understand the vibrancy that social housing can bring. They don't understand the community benefit that can bring. And I think the other thing too is there is, whether we like it or not, good and bad design, and what is incumbent on developers, on social housing developers and providers as well, is to come up with designs which actually respect the neighbourhood character while still delivering on the services that are so desperately needed. So I think council has obviously a planning role in sitting in judgment in some of these cases, but it also has a role in working with its communities to break down the stigma around social housing, because what we need is more housing, not less.
Thank you. The Cancer Council building on the corner of Rathdown Street would be a good spot to start with that one. If it was... Thank you. What an eyesore that is. If it was Drummond Street, I think we have to be careful about the neighbourhood character and the heritage streetscape that's existing there. If it was Swanston Street, as has been indicated, I think that's a more than reasonable place to put it. So I guess in context, yes, we do need to have that discussion. The social housing is necessary, absolutely. There are locations within Carlton, and I'm sure as a resident of Carlton that they would understand and appreciate that construction is necessary and an important part of our society. So, yes.
Thank you. Yeah, so I guess there are two issues that this person could potentially have. One is that it may be a heritage issue. The other is that they're concerned about the character of the neighbourhood with social housing moving in. We know that with good heritage planning, that urban infill development can work really well. And the other thing is that absolutely social housing is to be welcomed in a community. You know, it's young people, it's students, pensioners, people with a disability, anyone who's in the bottom 50% of earners. And I think, you know, this is exactly what we're talking about tonight, affordable housing. It's not some big scary thing. And I believe council recently held a citizens' assembly, and when you actually sit people down and you talk to them about what this really means and they understand it, then they end up being huge supporters of it. So it's just about communicating with the residents about what that actually means and getting them on board and why it's so important.
Thank you. I think, you know, for me, I've lived in so many different types of housing. I come from a single mother household, so I've seen how different housing affects different people. I want to add as well, Michael Smith, who's an architect and well-known advocate for housing and a good development, is on the team. Hakeem as well. So when it comes to talking to somebody about their concerns when it comes to social housing and these developments, I guess first of all, we've got to understand what are the issues they're raising. So I'm assuming that the planning issues are to code and they're what is required. So a lot of this is about a conversation around education, around trying to identify what are those issues that people have so that we can also bring community along. Part of the issue around affordable housing, social housing and public housing is a lack of understanding by communities of what this does, but ultimately housing is about building community, as you've heard more generally here. So I'd be talking to this person about understanding what the issues raised are, doing education session as part of council of what we're talking about and what's the evidence that informs decision making here. Because the People's Panel on Affordable Housing is a perfect example. Once people came together and had a conversation and understood the true issues and then deliberated, they came to pretty much the same conclusions. People understood the need and understood the requirements, and once you break it down to what are we talking about, such as those in affordable housing is about people who work within the municipality who are on very low or medium incomes, they're the kind of people we see every day and speak to in our community. So bringing that reality, that human reality, is probably really critical, and then trying to make sure that we're showcasing solutions.
Continuing with this, Lord Mayor Rees, your signature housing policy is the conversion of existing office buildings into homes. Now, I think, you know, any architect or builder will tell you that is probably an expensive undertaking and would require a large subsidy from council in order to be viable. The question is this: wouldn't a much cheaper plan to deliver homes be to simply upzone, such as what Ms Ingleton said, and then allow greater density in places like Carlton, Kensington, East Melbourne?
Yeah, so one of the benefits that Melbourne has is that we do have large tracts of land which is prime for new development close to the city. So I'm thinking here of areas like Fisherman's Bend, Arden, Macaulay, where if we get the right planning settings in there, get the trunk infrastructure in up front, not repeating the mistakes that have been made in the past, we can build really high quality, affordable housing and make Melbourne the envy of the world in terms of these new areas. We do need to look at other options though, and I do think looking at how we convert office towers, I'm talking here about sort of B and C and D grade office towers into office is something that we should be looking at. They're not attractive anymore to office workers. In some instances, they'll be good candidates for refurbishment for office, fine. But in many cases, they won't. And I think they're, with the right incentives in place through development bonuses, so in Sydney and other cities, they're looking at like 30% development bonuses, looking at rates holidays. You can get the incentives in place to get the investment to see those buildings find new life as residential accommodation in a place where it's desperately, desperately needed.
Can I ask just then, how can Melbourne then lead councils in densifying, if it's not willing to potentially deliver density so close to the actual city?
Yeah, so I'm very proud to have been the chair of the planning portfolio and been in a very YIMBY council. So in the city of Melbourne, there are over or close to 100 projects which have been approved with 16,000, almost 17,000 dwellings there. So the affordable housing issue in the city of Melbourne, this is where we need to really get into the detail, is not because of anything to do with our planning system, okay? There is a very big pipeline of approved dwellings that are there ready to go. The simple lie that sometimes gets told is the housing crisis is caused by NIMBY councils not approving new development. I can tell you in the city of Melbourne's case, close to 100 projects, 16,000 homes, fully approved, ready to go. There are market conditions there at the moment which are meaning that those projects aren't commencing. There are also opportunities for new development in Melbourne in those new development areas that I've flagged. There is also opportunity for new development along some of the transport corridors through the municipality as well. So I'm thinking about the tram lines that run through. So think about Victoria Parade, Swanston Street. Some of those streets across the municipality can easily accommodate thousands and thousands of new homes as well. It's all there. We've done a spatial plan for the municipality and done the real detailed, hard, some would say boring work about how we can accommodate an extra 174,000 people in this municipality over the next 2.5 decades. There's a plan there and it can be delivered, and it can deliver quality and affordable housing, and it can be done without necessarily needing to change the fabric of some of those heritage areas. We can do both. We can do both, Leo.
We're just letting some other candidates in. Ms Ingleton, what do you make of that? And then also the broader issue of density in the city of Melbourne.
So I believe Nick is referring to my comment about getting rid of the neighbourhood residential zones, perhaps, about preserving the character of the neighbourhoods and keeping those two-storey restrictions. We feel that there are really so few areas left in the city of Melbourne that actually have the neighbourhood residential zones, that by getting rid of those, we're actually, sending such a strong message out to the other municipalities, because we can't take this all on ourselves in the city of Melbourne, and other municipalities are going to have to get on board with it as well. And we need to lead by example by getting rid of those NRZ areas. If every metropolitan mayor said, oh, no, that's not our responsibility, that's somebody else's responsibility, then we're going to have a really big problem. So, yeah, we need a metropolitan focus. We need a Lord Mayor with a metropolitan focus. And, yeah, part of that is leading by example and getting rid of the NRZ.
I'll keep letting candidates in. I think you put your hand up, Mr Wood.
Yeah, I just want to come back to the conversion of commercial buildings to housing, and we've got to be honest with people about this. It's thrown around as a bit of a panacea. What we know is that for a commercial building to stack up in transitioning to housing, it has to be at about 80 to 90% of its value gone. I'm not willing to put my hand up in Melbourne and say that our economy is that shot, that our commercial building sector is at 80 to 90% of its value, because I can tell you what, we'd be in a recession right now. So what we actually need to have a conversation about, and Team Wood would do this within the first 100 days of being elected, we're all in agreement that we need new housing. What we would do is sit down with the development community, with the providers, with the experts that are in the room, and say, what are the foregone revenue options that we need to be looking at to actually get these projects to stack up, to get out of the ground? Because one thing to have planning approval, they're not getting built. We know why, because the market conditions aren't allowing them to get built. And what council has, what the state government has, and what the federal government has, is the opportunity to forego revenue. So this is not revenue they're getting already, whether that's rates, GST, or land tax. If this is a crisis, all levels of government need to take a haircut to get these built.
I think Mr. Bizzanello, you also put your hand up.
Yes, just to Miss Ingleton's point, I think if you want to drive a bulldozer down Powlett Street in East Melbourne or Drummond Street in Carlton, I'll be the one standing in front of that bulldozer. That's not acceptable in our city of Melbourne. We have enough infill sites, we have enough sites available to us to be able to do that, rather than converting neighbourhood residential zones and destroying our heritage.
Thank you. And I'll get back to you on this one, Mr. Woods, on the subject of subsidies this time. Given that social and affordable housing requires a subsidy, either in terms of density bonuses or cash, candidates do need strategies to deliver on these kinds of homes at scale. You are running on a rate-cutting platform, so how do you plan to address the affordable and social housing crisis on a tighter budget that is also self-imposed?
Yeah, look, I mean, we are the only team so far that it's announced cutting some of the projects at City of Melbourne, not selling assets like the Regent Theatre, of course. That's another way to get there, I suppose. But what we have announced is to get Town Hall's budget back under control so that we can actually take a rate holiday or a rate cut on some of these projects to get them out of the ground. And I don't think this is something where, you know, I'm not unrealistic that a rate cut suddenly gets a project out of the ground. It really is a partnership between the federal government, the state government, and City of Melbourne and the development community about what gets these projects out of the ground. And I think critically, City of Melbourne can play a leadership role in getting all parties together around the table. The convening power of a capital city like City of Melbourne is something that it should be used in this case.
Any other candidates want to? Mr. Reid?
You go. Thanks. I don't necessarily want to throw the current council a lifeline, but I just think there's a few comments that have been made here that are really important, and that is that it's not that there's a whole lot of issues, some that are out of the control of local government, but it's areas where local government can still play a role in terms of getting the housing outcomes we need. So things like tax issues and the way our tax is set up, particularly around encouraging the build-to-rent market, is really important. The impact of holding costs and why we're not getting some of these projects away. We've talked about planning delays. We've talked about opening up council land. So there's actually, I think, in some cases, some unanimity across all the Lord Mayoral candidates up here, maybe in dribs and drabs and in different lumps, but I think there's some common elements there that we can build on. I did want to come back to that last point about taxes and rates, and the one thing you're certainly not going to hear from the Labor for Melbourne campaign is about giving levels of tax exemptions to some part of the market. There are a whole lot of other areas that we can stimulate, and they're those ones I was talking about before. What are we doing about the availability of council land, the planning controls and the speed at which they work, and the holding costs that are then required for developers while they go through? They're the areas to tackle first.
Well, thank you. In relation to the conversion of office buildings to homes, quite frankly, the Liberal Party policy is to have those offices full of workers back in our great city. That's one thing we talk about a lot because we're passionate about making sure we get the workers back to Melbourne. Other factors in relation to the conversion, my wife, who's certainly a lot smarter than I am, she was a civil engineer, did a lot of building down in Docklands, and the complications and costs involved with converting a commercial footprint to housing are extreme and extremely costly. My third point is I've never seen myself as a radical, Greg, but certainly if the bulldozers start rolling into Powlett Street, I'll be chaining myself to them with you.
Thank you very much. Yep.
Who made it?
Mr. Curtis, we'll let you go and then we'll come back. We'll come back.
Oh, sorry, do you want to speak? Oh, no, you better go.
I just want to clarify that when I talk about getting rid of the neighbourhood residential zone, we're talking about changing it to, I think, like general residential. Like we're going two stories to 3 stories. This is not bulldozers. This is not crazy talk. And there's such small pockets of area. I just wanted to clarify that.
Yep. Thanks. Yeah, so speaking to the property experts, just so you know, Luke too, and just to make it feasible for them, it is a way of doing it, and you know, the incentive of also just holding off rates. And so, you know, if the property values have gone down, do council rates go down? Well, legally they should too, so there's another area too. But just to be able to give these builders incentives to be able to build these affordable housing through the current vacant offices or semi-vacant offices that occur now, these buildings. And so, yeah, that's really important. And so speaking to them, if we give them a little bit maybe extra at the top, maybe 2 or 3 levels or 4, making it look really grand and making sure that it looks good, then all of a sudden there's a little bit of cream at the top for these builders, because at the moment, the way building is and how expensive it is, it makes it really difficult for them. But we really need them to work it at the moment. And you're right, I mean, we're an advocate of getting, and we can't force workers back, but we would like to see them, and even if it's a little bit of an ease to the workers, so we don't just force them to come back 4 or 5 days, but there might be ways of just slowly getting people back to the city, because that's our goal, is to get people back to the city. We need it lively, and we know how incredible this city is, and we want it, you know, back to the way that it was before, and getting as many people back as possible.
Anyone else want to jump in? Yep. Just quick.
Thank you. Really important conversation. This is the crux of this. But when it comes to, I think, and it's been said, you can't convert too many of those commercial buildings to residential. That's the reality. If you think about commercial, you've got everything going through the middle, through the lift shaft, and you don't have the same floor plan as you do with the residential. So it's often, all the literature says it's often cheaper to knock it down, and it's even cheaper from a carbon perspective. Yes, there are some buildings that could be, and we should convert those, so I agree on that point. But what we really need to bring together is something that harnesses the energy and brings all parties together, because this is a conversation like a river, with rivers that might have multiple dams on them. You remove one dam, that's like one bottleneck. And there's so many bottlenecks that are related to this, and I think it's been said, so many different parties need to be involved at local, state and federal government level. So for Melbourne, for us, how we do that is bringing back Postcode 3000. We're committing to a future Postcode 3000 strategy that looks at how we recharge Postcode 3000 and look at it slightly differently. But first of all, we've got to review our urban environment again and identify ways to enhance that program and bring that back. We want to tackle offices, that office vacancy by bringing creative solutions as well as some converting the ones that can be converted. But incentivizing builders through a quality fast track, working with state and federal government to be able to bring more affordable housing here is then critical as part of that.
Thank you. Moving on, Mr. Reid, you're running as the Labor for Melbourne candidate, so that does make it fitting to talk about the relationship between state governments and local councils. I know you kind of alluded to it before. It is a pretty strained relationship at times. If elected Lord Mayor, you would have the dual responsibilities of both fighting for better treatment of councils, but also leading councils in undertaking bold and necessary reforms to actually enable more homes. How would you balance that leadership?
It's a question that came up during the last campaign as well. I actually don't see why it's such a big issue. We clearly have issues at times where we've got a state government that's of one political hue and a federal government that is either of the same political hue or a different political hue. I think most governments understand their level and responsibility of government. So what I'd be saying to you is our answer lies in what we're trying to do, and that whole notion of campaigning on the basis of let's keep local government local, first and foremost. I know we're a capital city. I know we draw the attention of the statewide media in what goes on, and you know, the local paper, if you like, for the City of Melbourne is the Herald Sun and the Age and the Oz. But first things first, we've got to stick to our lane and deal with the issues and the challenges that local government has. And that's no different than in navigating the relationship between the City of Melbourne government and the state government than it is for the state government to manage its responsibilities where they overlap with the federal government. Sometimes it can be a pretty robust debate regardless of who's in power, but it's got to be founded first and foremost on, do we understand what our role is and what our responsibilities are?
Mr. Martin, you're obviously, running as an endorsed Liberal here. We're not in that position usually. We do have a state Labor government. How would you, again, if elected, on the Liberal leadership ticket, work, with a government of a different party to be effective for council?
Well, I think working with anyone, regardless of their background, your background, first of all, you do attract more bees with honey than vinegar. So you've got to make sure you're having full and frank discussions, but also polite, and you just got to cut through that. I don't see any challenges with a Liberal leadership here working with a Labor leadership, and hopefully in time, a Victorian Liberal government to get things done for Melbourne. I mean, we do all acknowledge on this panel that the City of Melbourne, as great as it is, can't fight and do all the things it wants to do by itself. So you have to have good partnerships with people. You have to have good relationships with all levels of government. And I have no issue talking to a Labor minister or a Labor premier to get things done for Melbourne, because that's what has to happen.
Thank you. Mr. Bisner, I'll get to you in just a moment. Ms. Ingleton, again, in terms of party politics, right, the Greens do sometimes have a strained relationship with the state Labor government. Again, how would you be able to work effectively to actually ensure homes are delivered and outcomes are, really achieved?
Thanks for the question. I think we firstly have our amazing Greens colleagues already within the state government that we would have as awesome advocates for all of our plans for improving housing affordability here in Melbourne. As much as Labor loves to hate the Greens, we have had some really successful partnerships. The Gillard government passed a record amount of legislation with Adam Bandt back in the day. When Labor decides to come to the party, we can be a really successful coalition.
Mr. Bisner?
Oh, Leo, you might be surprised, but what we have here sitting tonight is a de facto Liberal candidate in Anthony Koutafidis with a team that also has a Liberal deputy and a Liberal sitting as the first one on their candidacy. You've got a Liberal person sitting beside him, and Luke, you've got a Labor person sitting there. Nick's a little bit confused because he's a Labor person, but he's running with a Liberal candidate. Aaron's okay, but he does have a Liberal as his number one on his ticket and a Green on number two on his ticket. Then we have the Greens here. And then there's Jamal, who's very close to the Greens. So I think the answer is... to have an independent Lord Mayor, genuinely, who can work with those candidates.
One team would for independence.
Anyone want to weigh in on that, or Jamal? Yep.
I'll let you know that I'm a member of no party. I am a resident independent, and so is our team. So, as a fellow resident and independent, I think
they're very close.
Was a little bit below.
Greens, I imagine, Jamal.
Yep.
Yeah. Thanks, Greg. So both Aaron, myself, and Aaron are independent. Never been a member of a political party, and will proudly represent the City of Melbourne, the best interests of the residents, ratepayers and businesses of this city.
All right. Thank you all for weighing in on that. Moving on, Mr. Martin, to you. As the City of Melbourne continues to grow, car dependency could become a serious issue. Council will need to either investigate congestion and parking prices or give people a greater number of options for getting around. Now, your party is among the candidates that have pledged to rip up the bike lanes in the city. Cars do take up a lot of space, more space than bikes and scooters, and in many ways they are less safe for pedestrians. What are your proposals then for enabling Melburnians to travel actively, freely and safely?
Thank you. Great question, and it's one I've been talking about a lot. So the first thing is to give Melburnians and visitors to our great city choice. And when we say we're going to look at selectively removing bike lanes, we mean it, because there has been a tendency for those to become impediments to free movement in vehicles. But you're 100% right, it's all about a mix. It's all about a sensible balance, and we believe in making sure Melbourne's accessible no matter how you want to get here. If you want to choose to ride your bike, maybe if in time the e-scooters come back, we could whip in on one of those, that'd be good too. And we want to make sure we've got a good mix of public transport as well. But certainly, we are going to look at the bike lanes and what we can do to improve accessibility around this great city, because at the moment it isn't accessible enough. And to your point, it will get more challenging as more people come to live in our great city and hopefully come to work in our great city as well.
Lord Mayor Rees, you've led the council putting some of these lanes in. Will you pledge tonight to actually keep them?
Yeah, I mean, I do think the bike lanes are a permanent part of our transport system. They help people get around safely and help the system work efficiently. I'll be the first to admit that I don't think the City of Melbourne has got the rollout of the bike lanes perfect. I think mistakes were made, most certainly, in how that was done. They were rolled out quickly. There wasn't quality materials used. We had deterioration of the infrastructure, and everybody ended up being annoyed with them. I think there's improvements that can be made. I also think that we can see more bike lanes in the City of Melbourne so that we have an overall safe system. I think the key here is optimisation of the transport system, not ideology.
Councillor Hakim, you've obviously been on council as these kind of policies have been put in place. The Lord Mayor there, you just admitted, hasn't been perfect. How would you work to improve it?
Look, it's really important to continue to grow it and build it. We've put out our active transport and congestion policies. We're committed to delivering the riding lanes in full. It's really important for safety. It's really important for the future of our city, because let's be clear. Let's not mince facts. Our population is doubling. No matter what we do, there's not enough road space. So we've got to change the equation. We've got to make sure that people who need to use cars can use cars. And for people who increasingly use public transport and bikes, they can do so safely, and we're looking after everybody. So we're going to deliver those riding lanes in full. A congestion review to ensure that we're working out how do we combat congestion. Over 50% of cars going through the city are going through the city. That's north to south, south to north, east to west, west to east. They need to go around the city, not through the city, because they're the ones who are causing congestion. And so we'll work with the state government to make sure we can get some sort of bypass and work through that. And as an immediate thing, we'll bring in scramble crossings. Ones that even Adelaide has them. They're everywhere around the world. We've got one on Flinders Street and Elizabeth. They will start to move traffic in a way that works. So this is not about removing things. This is not about cancelling things out. It's about making sure that what we've got works, and we grow on that.
Thank you. Now, moving on, let's talk about affordable housing mandates, otherwise known as inclusionary zoning. This mandate would require a given portion of every new housing build to be affordable. Now, while these mandates can be well-intentioned and can work, in some ways they ultimately function as a bit of a tax on new housing. If this tax is too high when compared to the benefit, then the homes simply won't get built. Ms Ingleton, you have a policy of affordable housing mandates going up to 30%. How will you make sure that you implement this in a way that doesn't just stop new homes getting built in the first place? Thanks,
Leo. So where we're speaking specifically about the 30% inclusionary zoning, this would be restricted only to land that is at the moment Crown land and has not yet been sold. So this is the Arden, Dynon and Eagate areas, and that land will be sold to the developer with the condition that when they build on it, it will have the 30% inclusionary of affordable homes. So in that way, the developers can factor that in to any plans that they have for the site. Did you want to talk about a more general broad-based IZ, or just...
You can go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, so otherwise, we're coming out of a recession at the moment, and this is the perfect time to start thinking about how to include mandatory inclusionary zoning in our planning, because it's as the economy is starting to bounce back that we're going to be planning ahead, and factoring this in going forward is really important. So we believe starting with something fairly low, like we're talking, even less than 5%, 2%, but having a plan, a long-term 10-year plan to start to increase that, and preferably this is going to be working with the state government to make this like preferably metropolitan-wide, if not state-wide. But we absolutely have to start thinking about this because, as Rob said in his opening statement, like, where will we be without it? We have to have it, and it has to start somewhere, and now is the perfect time to start planning for it.
Mr. Wood, you're obviously running on a lot of things, but affordable housing continues to be this big issue. What do you make of, I guess, that kind of proposal, and then how would you be tackling the issue of affordable housing as Lord Mayor?
Look, I think this, this problem is of such a scale that City of Melbourne can only do so much, whether that's on City of Melbourne-owned land. I think our urban renewal areas can carry some of that burden as well. But this is a problem whereby when you're in a crisis position, you do some things differently, and we have to stimulate the private market. This is not something whereby government alone can deliver this, and what we're talking about is the full spectrum of housing. We're not talking about just social housing, which is the domain largely of government. What we're talking about is that full spectrum of housing, and that key worker housing is absolutely critical, because if we don't get the key worker housing built, largely by the private sector, what you actually see is people who would normally be in key worker housing coming under financial strain, coming under financial pressure, and guess what? They're the next lot of people that are going to end up in really housing instability and insecurity. So this is really for the full continuum of housing, looking at all the different levers that are available. But if we think that the private sector isn't going to do a lot of the heavy lifting, and to do that, we need to be sitting down and talking about what are the current market conditions and how do we get these projects out of the ground. Because while we can set some sort of target, if they're not getting built, they're not getting built.
And just quickly, Lord Mayor Rees, again on affordable housing, again you've been on council for, well, more than the past 4 years, but within the past 4 years, I guess, how are you going to make sure it's addressed by the time, say, if you are re-elected, the next council term's up?
Yeah, so I mentioned the plan to build 4,000 new homes through office to residential conversion, and I said up front that there are challenges with office to residential conversion. That's why this is a very informed policy. Hassel Architects have done an analysis of all the buildings around the city and identified 80 towers which they believe are prime candidates for office to residential conversion. So that means, for example, that the lifts are located in the right spot, that the floor to ceiling heights are right, that they're located in a part of the city which will make it attractive for residential living. I mean, you've got to think about what the alternative is, that we demolish those buildings, and demolishing buildings is very wasteful in terms of the embodied carbon that is lost, and so it's wasteful and it creates waste. So we need to be putting incentives in place to try and get the outcomes that we're looking for in our current city, and at the moment we really need those incentives there to encourage more residential development. I also think we need to be quite careful with some of the policies that have been talked about by some of the candidates tonight. I know they are well-intentioned, but they could actually have the opposite outcome to what we're seeking. So, I have been a supporter of inclusionary zoning in the past, but I do not think now is the right time for the introduction of inclusionary zoning. Let me explain why. At the moment, it costs about $11,000 per square metre to build a new dwelling in Melbourne. A developer will sell that for about $15,000. So $11,000, $12,000 to build, $15,000, maybe $16,000 to sell. The profit that can be made by the developer, when you take into account the project risk and everything that goes with it, is so slim at the moment that they're not building anything. That's why new projects aren't starting in Melbourne at the moment. That's why when I sit here and say, hey, from a planning perspective at Town Hall, we've approved close to 100 projects, 16,000 dwellings, fully ready to go. Why aren't they starting? It's because the developers, let's face it, they're apex capitalists. If they can make $1, they'll do it. If they can't, they won't. At the moment, they can't make $1, and so they're not starting. So if you come along with a new impost, like a 30% inclusionary zoning requirement for affordable housing, you will put further constraints on the supply of new housing. Equally, if you go and do something like remove the neighbourhood residential zone, replace it with GRZ, then under the recent changes in the planning system by the state government, that is far more permissive than 2 stories to 3 stories. And so will that add to housing supply and in Melbourne? Not a scintilla, I would put to you. What it will do is potentially wreck some of the most beautiful streetscapes in Melbourne. Like, Melbourne has possibly the best heritage Victorian era residential areas of any city in the world, I would put to you. And they do not exist in large areas, but they are something that is very valuable to our city. If we were sitting here saying we can't get enough affordable housing built because of these areas, it would be a debate, but it's not. There, as I said, there are many, many thousands of apartments that are approved. There's many new development areas that they can go. And so that's why why that doesn't necessarily solve the problem.
I am just conscious of time here. You had your hand up, Ms Ingleton. I'll let you go ahead.
So first of all, I just wanted to say, let's not confuse zoning with heritage. They're 2 very different things. If a building is a heritage building, it's a heritage building. It's regardless of the zone that it's in. Secondly, the proposal to have a mandatory inclusionary zoning, that's what I'm saying. We're coming out of a recession, and it would be what the market can handle, yeah? So as the market is recovering, it would need to be equitable and consistent and in line with what the market can handle. And it's actually not a radical idea, because I do believe that this is what was recommended by the Ministerial Advisory Committee on Planning Mechanisms for Affordable Housing back in 2020. Obviously, the pandemic came along, changed completely the landscape, but it's really important that while the market is recovering, that we're starting a long-term plan to put these mechanisms into place.
Thank you very much. Moving on to the low-rise elephant in the room, East Melbourne. Mr Brisanella, we do have a growing city here, and we know that a growing city has to make trade-offs. You're explicitly concerned about heritage, which we just heard mentioned there, and it is worth talking about because it's a bit of a policy suite that is used at times bluntly to lock a number of people out of the city. How do you reconcile heritage concerns with the fact that, you know, a terrace in East Melbourne goes for $5.5 million and that we've made it illegal to build anything in its place?
Thanks for the question, Leo. And I think there's some validity in what you've got to say there. But there are aspects of East Melbourne that are available to be developed. So we're talking about Albert Street, which has had considerable development over its term and considerable high-rise development. Also Clarendon Street, and the other one is obviously Wellington Parade. So if anybody knows that lovely gateway into the city, there is an opportunity there to develop high-rise, social housing, affordable housing, and housing for others. There's certainly a price issue, and we accept that that's the fact, Leo, that it costs a lot of money because of the nature of where you're living. But just remember about East Melbourne, and we do get called NIMBYs, and I live in a very small little 2-bedroom apartment, and so do 70% of my colleagues that live in that in that suburb. So it's not exactly one that is continuously covered just by heritage properties, but they are important, they are valuable, they are the sort of places that I walk past and it elevates my heart and makes me feel good to know that they are there and that they are some recognition of what we have had in our past. And I think to suggest that we should somehow change that is a mistake. So we can have both, Leo. We can have some high-rise development, which we already do, along Wellington Parade, along Albert Street, along Clarendon Street, and we can also protect our heritage.
All right, I am just conscious of time here, so I'll just get moving on here. Again, continuing to talk about similar issues on docklands, and there is a great deal of density in docklands and also in the CBD, but we know, as we've discussed, right, other parts of the city of Melbourne, Carlton, Parkvale, they're pretty low density even though they're on the doorstep of the city. Lord Mayor Rees, you recently supported outgoing councillor Leppett's motion to investigate abolishing the outdated neighbourhood residential zone within Melbourne City Council, which, as we've discussed, right, would essentially be a process of brought-up zoning. If re-elected Lord Mayor, can we expect you would continue to have leadership on brought-up zoning and then delivering density right across the city?
I don't think there's any neighbourhood residential zoning in Docklands.
But there's density, so not density in Carlton. So,
I mean, if you look at the zoning
just on density, yeah.
So I support densification of Melbourne as a principle. The point I'm trying to make is it needs to be done very carefully, and I'm also making the point that there are corridors across the city in established areas which can support densification, and I think that's a good thing. But my key point is it needs to be done carefully, and I don't think it should be done in a way which risks some of the most beautiful streetscapes in our city. I also think that if you're looking at Docklands, I mean, they have challenges there. I mean, the key lesson for me out of Docklands is that you need to get the infrastructure and the amenity planned right up front, and you need to have government as a partner up front. The challenge with Docklands is they wanted to get the development up quickly, so they divvied it up into 3 parcels. Mirvac got one bit, Lend-Lease got another, MAB got another, and the infrastructure was not invested in up front, the amenity was not invested up in front, and we've had the challenging role at the City of Melbourne trying to retrofit that in, and it's made life very hard for us.
Mr Wood, again, just on the last bit there, we've been discussing upzoning and density. Again, if you were elected Lord Mayor, how would you lead on that particular issue for Melbourne?
Yeah, I think any major city around the world, what you need to do is density allows you to make better use of your assets, and that's critical. Melbourne is a very large geographic city by world standards, and what that does is it means there are people who don't have access to public transport, who don't have access to all the transport options that they would have. They don't have the infrastructure investment that a more dense city brings. As soon as we talk about density though, we think about skyscrapers. When you look at around about 4 to 6 stories, you can fit a heck of a lot of people in medium density development while still delivering the best return on your assets and having neighbourhood character and community connection. So we've got to get away from this idea that density is all bad. There is, of course, bad ways of developing and good ways of developing. And what we've got to ensure is that medium density is sort of not stigmatised with some of these developments as well. I think the other thing that's absolutely critical though is we've heard lots of conversation. What Town Hall needs to do is use its convening power right now, because we've even heard some pretty bad comments about developers. And again, you know, people can have their views about whether developers are in it for profit or not, and if they are in it for profit, is that a bad thing? What we need to be doing is sitting down with developers, with all levels of government, with relevant agencies, and immediately talking about the current economic conditions that we are in and why homes aren't getting built. And that conversation I don't think is being led.
I will get to some other candidates in just a second, but just continuing with that, would you, again as Lord Mayor, commit to delivering more density in, say, like your own home suburb of Kensington?
Absolutely. Kensington is currently delivering exactly that medium density, that sort of 5, 6 stories. It's being done with high quality development, with lots of different materials, and it looks absolutely fantastic and is delivering homes where people need it most.
All right, Mr Reid, you wanted to weigh in?
Yeah, look, one of the issues that I was going to touch on in answering the last questions around inclusion rezoning, but it's just as relevant here when we talk about density, is the biggest challenge I think we've got to overcome is we lock ourselves down at both at the local government level, but we also see it at the state level as well, with mandatory controls that we impose on buildings. That really limits our flexibility when we look at buildings, not only about how we accommodate the density, but I just want to come back to where I started tonight's debate. It's not simply about building the places people live in, it's about making sure we're building communities and putting in the sorts of services, the open spaces, the communal spaces that can be leveraged by people. So at the moment we are very tied down with mandatory controls, and I think as a council we've got to learn to loosen that up. So we talk about bringing people together. I don't think, I'm not suggesting we need a summit. We need to do it every day of the week in Town Hall, bring people together, loosen the controls, try and find common ground where we can build a community, but we can give developers the incentive to move forward at the pace that they need and that future home dwellers require.
Mr Koutafidis, again, just on this issue of density, which is, we've come back to it a lot in this Town Hall because it is so important. How would you lead on that, especially again for those areas that might be a bit more lower density but are still right on the edge of this CBD?
Yeah, I think you need to find the appropriate spots for them too. I mean, we want to preserve our suburbs that are so, like, exclusive to the world. And when people come here, and I know growing up around those areas of Carlton and Parkville, and they're just wonderful areas. And so I understand the crisis now. All of a sudden we've become this big city around the world, and so the flow of the population is growing. But I still believe, you know, if we get it right in the CBD and have more affordable housing in there and be able to attract the people in there, will ease the pain. And so that's why I believe what we're doing in terms of office spaces and converting them into affordable housing will definitely help. It's really important too. And the incentives for developers too, as they've been mentioned, with the permits now, there's got to be incentives for developers to be able to build right now, because it's just not feasible.
Wonderful. Do you want me to go? Yep. One last question for all the candidates, and I'll share why I'm doing, or what we are doing, and why we're doing it. First of all, as you said earlier, I'm a developer. I'm a capitalist, but it doesn't mean I don't care about vulnerable people. And the more that I learnt about what I didn't know, the more I'm so scared for our grandkids, which is why I agreed to do this and why Leo needs to ask the question. Homelessness is a housing problem. And why I say that, we brought a guy from America, Associate Professor Greg Colburn. We were downstairs and had zinc sold out with compassionate capitalists caring about the vulnerable people in our city. And this is endemic of the whole country, but let's just use City of Melbourne. We are allowing homelessness to be normalised every single day. And while we allow it to be normalised, it becomes invisible and it grows. And one day we're going to be so shocked that we say, how did it get to this? When he toured Australia and he was walking with me in both Sydney and Melbourne, he said, Rob, this looks so similar to where we were 20 years ago in Seattle, when we were looking at LA and New York and saying, they've got a homeless problem, but we're okay. 20 years later, they've got a huge problem because they allowed it to be normalised. The task for any government is, how do you collaborate in the interest of the future when you know that something like housing, we need to draw a line and say no more homelessness, purely to have a target that we know that incrementally we're going to get to somewhere that we wouldn't get to without proper collaboration. And you can respond, but this requires a whole community together. If I had my way, we would be declaring war on the housing crisis. Because during war times, enemies get together to solve a fundamental problem for our country. To me, that is the challenge all of you have got in front of you as councillors, and whoever the Lord Mayor is, I wish you honest luck, because this is something that we have to solve. And your role as the Lord Mayor is a leadership role to demonstrate to the rest of the country what we're actually doing. So I'm not sure if anyone wants to comment about that, but I'm just so concerned that we are allowing homelessness to be normalised. And if we projected ourselves to 30 years, we'd say, what the hell has happened? Because we allowed it.
So, for any candidates, there, just on what Rob said, and we'll just go down the line because it is the last question. How are you really going to work to make sure, you know, the issue of homelessness is addressed for this city, and on the issue of broader housing? We'll just go down the line. We'll start with you, Councillor Hakim.
Thank you. Thanks, Leo. And a really important question. Thanks, Rob. When it comes to homelessness, the solutions are clear. Housing first. And we've seen that all over the world. Nothing else works. Housing first and services to come and follow and come around that. If elected and as Lord Mayor, I would work with every level of government, with every private organisation, with every non-profit, and I've pushed through this term to get our commitments to zero homelessness. We've got to pilot some sort of housing first initiatives here in Melbourne that can showcase that to the rest of Australia. But also we need to work with creative innovation that's happening around Australia. I've been working with a private operator in Sydney who's recognised that 70% of people who are rough sleeping have a disability. So they've created a model that works with investors and requires but just a little bit of government support so we can get people off the streets and into housing with support services around them. These are the sort of initiatives that we need to support, and they're the sort of initiatives I would support as Lord Mayor.
I absolutely agree, Rob is right, and we are at risk of normalising homelessness, and that's shameful. We can end homelessness. We should not settle for simply reducing it or for supporting homeless people to remain homeless. Ending homelessness would be a top priority for me as Lord Mayor of Melbourne. We may not always be able to prevent people from becoming homeless, but we can achieve functional zero homelessness, whereby there's an emergency response available to anyone who finds themselves homeless, and their experience of homelessness should be brief and non-recurring. I support the principle of housing first, which reverses the traditional idea that we need to help solve people's problems before guaranteeing them housing. On the contrary, people need secure housing if they have any hope of sorting out the causes of their homelessness, which may be complex, long-standing, and potentially traumatic. So the most important thing that we can do for people facing homelessness is house them and support them to remain housed. And that's why I would expand the Homes Melbourne department within Melbourne City Council and its resources to accelerate progress towards 300 new social housing units on council-controlled land within the next term of council if I'm elected Lord Mayor.
Thanks, Roxane. Could we have a show of hands here of how many people would like to solve the homeless problem by not having any homeless people in Melbourne? And I'm seeing most of you. And it really is a collective goal that we want to achieve. And with your support, we can get to that point. As the other candidates have indicated, it is a paramount issue. I'm sure Nick's going to start to talk to you about what the City of Melbourne is currently doing, but there already is a policy in place for zero homelessness. There's been a people's panel, which my deputy, who I think's here tonight, Meg Stevenson, was part of on homelessness. It's a priority, and as a Lord Mayor candidate here tonight, I'd sit here and say to you that it'd be a top priority for me as well. To see anybody sleeping rough is a very, very sad situation. We have an inalienable right to have shelter. And for our psychology friends here tonight that might follow the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, food, shelter, and a sense of belonging is fundamental to human existence.
I had an amazing experience presented by Blackfella Films SPS for Filthy Rich and Homeless Season 3. And I'll never ever say that I know what it's like to be homeless, because I had a home to return to at the end of those 10 nights. But geez, they did a bloody good job of giving me an idea. And it's not 10 nights or 5 nights or months. One night on the streets with nothing does something to your mental health, does something to your physicality. And the idea that you're suddenly going to get a job and become a contributing member of society is just so farcical. You just spiral down and down and down. So I think, Rob, your point about not accepting homelessness has to be the absolute fundamental piece. We can talk about all the levers that we can pull, but we just can't accept it. And there are cities around the world that haven't accepted it. And what they've done is work with all levels of government, work with the private sector in true collaboration to look at every aspect of the housing continuum and work back from the goal of zero homelessness. And that actually has to be the goal, and that has to drive the investment, that has to drive the leadership on council-owned property in terms of planning itself, but absolutely in sitting down with the private sector and working collaboratively with them. We won't do it without them. It's got to have a market lens to this, particularly when it comes to key worker housing.
Well spoken. Rob, can everyone hear me? Rob, thank you for everything you've done in this sector over the years, and thanks for being a driving force in convening tonight. And I agree with everything you said there in your remarks. And thank you to all the good people who are here tonight. I mean, folks who turn out on a Monday night to talk about an issue like that. It's a reminder that we are a city of good people. For me, as Lord Mayor, it's unacceptable that we have a city where people can't find quality, affordable homes to live in, and where we experience homelessness. I have had the experience of homelessness in my own immediate family, and I know how destructive that can be, not just for the individual, but for their friends and loved ones. The truth is that there isn't a simple answer to the challenges we've been talking about tonight. If there was, you wouldn't have a room full of good people like here wrestling with how we take this forward. The commitment I make to everyone here tonight is, if I'm re-elected as Lord Mayor, then I see this as the most pressing challenge for the city, and I will focus all my energy on how we go about solving it. I do think there are solutions there. The fact is, we have got on top of this in past decades, and we can do it again. It will take investment from other levels of government in social and affordable housing. It will require some measures by the city, the likes of which we have talked about tonight, but I'm absolutely confident that as a city, and a city like Melbourne, we can do it, and we can do it together. Thank you.
Rob, there's at least one candidate on the councillor slate of tickets, and I won't name them. I suspect there might be a few more, but at least one councillor candidate who has expressed to me their view that the way to deal with homelessness is essentially to scoop up all the homeless people we see on the streets of Melbourne and take them out to the facility that was built as the COVID hub during lockdown. I absolutely disagree with that sort of scenario. We have to start this problem from a position of empathy and understanding the needs and the rights of those people who often have mental health challenges underneath it. And I think, as we've noted, there is no single solution. But I do want to come back to two elements. One is the simple one I've been banging on about all night, the role that good services play. It's not just about the roof and the walls. It's about the fabric of services that you provide, and they are the areas, and they're often the first door, or an opportunity at least, to give someone a door to walk through. The outreach services that some of them run, and we know that the groups that are active in the city are certainly hard taxed in terms of their the personnel and the often volunteer efforts they rely on. So certainly it's a broad question, and it comes down to, are we providing those communal spaces, communal facilities where service operators can work from? There are a few in the city, and I don't want to suggest it's not there. There's actually been a fair bit of work done. The other one I just want to say, and it's probably a broader comment, an old chairman of an organisation I worked for a while, he would always challenge the executive management team whenever we started talking about programs and initiatives, and always say, his default position was always, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So there's a couple of key areas that we've identified on the Labor for Melbourne team where we need to have measurements, where we talk about what we can do, but we need to measure it. And so that's things like our environmental footprint, our economic footprint, but we absolutely, I think, need to include a measurement around homelessness to make sure that we are challenging ourselves year on year to make sure that we are improving the position of those people who find themselves homeless in the city of Melbourne, and make sure we're creating options and opportunities that give them a way out.
Well, thank you very much, Rob, for your question, but also for shining a light on the compassionate capitalists which are out there, and being able to come together in a function like this, and all the extra work you do is fantastic. And I think the point is a strong one, and you're proud and you own it, that you are a developer, because private enterprise and citizens have a role to play in solving this crisis as well. So I thank you for bringing that point up. I'll sound like everyone else, and everyone else is on the same page. We don't have a silver bullet. I do not want to lie to you and say the Liberal Party will end homelessness in the next 2 minutes, because it's not going to happen. But what a Liberal Party council would do was to make sure we give every opportunity for those who face homelessness to improve that situation for themselves, because the best social dividend you can have is a job, and also that leads to being able to get yourself a home and a safe place to be. It improves your self-worth and improves your state of mind, and the benefits are endless. So there is no easy answer, but what must happen is to continue the conversation, and blokes like you putting the spotlight on this issue in a organised and sophisticated manner is a credit to you and the organisation, so thank you for doing that.
Well done, mate. Well done. Love your passion, Rob. I mean, it's exactly what we need. I was at the Planet Shakers yesterday down at City Road, and as I turned up there to spend a little bit of time, they're a food bank, and it's called Empower. There's a lot of homeless people there, but there's a lot of people that are suffering during these tough economic times, and you're spot on, because if we don't put a light on it and really focus on it, there may be more, obviously, than coming on our streets. So it must be a focus for us to get the people off the streets and really do help them. And the Planet Shakers yesterday was unbelievable. As I turned up there, it was like, where are all the people? They said, just look around the corner, and there was lines. It would have been over 100 metres long, and that went on from 10 a.m. in the morning or 8 a.m. in the morning until 1 p.m. In the afternoon, and so many volunteers. So like, I agree with everyone. We all need to help, and the volunteers yesterday were just, to see them give up their time for the people that are struggling was wonderful. So affordable housing, we've got to help these people get off the street.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you all so much. A big round of applause to all of our candidates.
And there you go. That was the Lord Mayoral Town Hall done in conjunction with YIMBY Melbourne and Housing All Australians with the special support of Fed Square and Ausstage events. We did mention at the start there was a pre-poll and a post-poll snap poll conducted among the audience, and these are the results you can see on screen now. Jamal Hakim had the biggest swing towards him. He started with 16.4% before the debate started and then ended up with 29.4%. He's followed by Roxane Ingleton from the Greens, Phil Reid, Aaron Wood, Anthony Koutafidis, Mariam Riza, who of course was represented by Luke Martin as the Liberals, Greg Bizanella and Nick Rees, the incumbent, at the bottom there with a 13.5% swing away from him. This, of course, is not a scientific poll, just conducted among the audience as a straw poll to gauge their thoughts. We appreciate everyone for tuning in, and of course you can see the latest local government coverage whenever you want on our dedicated website, localelections.com.au.
This has been a 6 News special presentation.